Hey, what's up guys, Shadow Steel here. Welcome to a different style of Trackside that we are going to be doing today. We are going to be doing a review, for once, of the Frisco 1500 class mountain types from Machine Rail. These locomotives are... Well, let's get a bit of history about the Frisco and the 1500s out of the way first. Now, you'll probably notice right off the bat I'm saying 1500s rather than the actual name that they put on the website, which is T-54. That's not correct, and I'll explain why in a second. So the Frisco Railroad, or St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad, as it was once called when it was first chartered, was a railroad that, for all intents and purposes, was an attempt at a transcontinental railroad between St. Louis and San Francisco, the two namesake cities. The railroad was formed in the 1800s, late 1800s. I don't exactly know the date off the top of my head. I actually plan to make a dedicated video for the Frisco Railroad in the future. But by the 1900s, their equipment was getting kind of dated, and they had already gone through two different bankruptcies by this point, forming into the later St. Louis San Francisco Railroad, better known as Frisco. And by that point, they needed to acquire new equipment. Most of the equipment were 462 Pacifics, 280 consolidations, stuff like that. They had not really gotten better equipment, and because of the events of World War I and the government control of the railroads, a lot of that equipment was worn to hell. So by the 1920s, they decided to order from the Baldwin Locomotive Works the Frisco 1500s. Now, I want to point out that a lot of people call these locomotives the T-54s, and this kind of stems from a misnomer that was found a misnomer that was seen by a couple people from several builders' photographs that Baldwin had taken. In early builders' photographs of the 1500s, not the T-54s, they actually have a label underneath the cab here saying T-54, which is not present on later photographs of any of the locomotives, including the ones that are in preservation. But yes, there are seven of these locomotives that are in preservation. T-54 was meant to denote the tractive effort, similar to that of how the Denver and Rio Grande Western and many other railroads had a denotion of their tractive effort on their locomotives. Union Pacific also had the same thing, whether it be because of the driver's side or anything like that. So the T-54 was actually denoting tractive effort on the early first batch, which was delivered to the Frisco in 1923. The last batch, which is what this model is based off of, was delivered in 1926. Now, this is another thing that's a little bit complicated, because some of the locomotives were delivered in the 1522 in particular was delivered in May of 1926. And as a result, most of her other sisters were delivered at that same time. However, construction probably would have started in May in 1925, which is what the year is on the actual builder's plates. in this model. Now, of course, this also comes with the... So, the 1500s, of course, are pretty well known because of the 1522 herself. She's probably the most iconic of the bunch because she was brought back to excursion service in May of 1988. Almost 50, a little over 50 years after she was retired by the Frisco in what was it? 1950. Well, 1951 is when she was officially retired. She was donated to the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis in 1960. There's actually a photograph of the 1522 in Springfield, Missouri in 1959, where the Frisco shops, the main Frisco shops, were based in Springfield, Missouri. The Frisco shops were doing some work on the 1522 before they donated her to the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis. And it just so happens that one of those photographs shows her with a doghouse tender. Now, if you don't know what a doghouse tender is, it's basically a tender with a little shack on the top here. There'd be a little shack. I mean, the Denver and Rio Grande Western, bringing them up again, were famous for their narrow gauge engines having the doghouse tenders, and there's actually all the DNRG W locomotives that are still around all have their doghouse tenders. Only a handful of them don't, and that's usually because they were the smaller locomotives. They're bigger locomotives, the Ks in particular, have the doghouse tender still on them. But the 1522 in 1959 was still in her freight service livery. So by the 1940s, she was pulled off of her premier passenger service runs and most of her premier freight service runs to handle local service trains in and around Oklahoma. Her last job was a freight turn, as it's called, out of Oklahoma. So she was doing local freight service by the late 1940s and into the 1950s. In 1951, she was retired from the Frisco Railroad and shipped off to a deadline in Arkansas, where she sat for a few years before the Frisco shops decided to bring her and 1501 back up to Missouri, where both locomotives received work by the Frisco shops. 1522 got the most extensive work as she had her asbestos lagging or insulation removed from her boiler. She had a lot of other little bits and pieces were done to actually bring her back to pretty much like new condition for when she was donated to the museum. So she was at tip-top condition. And in 1985, the St. Louis Steam Trade Association, which, by the way, we're going to talk about as well, decided to bring back one of these many, many steam locomotives at the museum back to service. And the locomotive they chose, of course, was none other than the 1522. St. Louis Steam Train Association, or SLSTA, as it's shown on this car right here, was the all-volunteer group that maintained, operated, and restored the 1522 in 1988, and operated the locomotive between that and 2002. The locomotive would be retired in 2002 due to rising insurance costs for FRA 1472 mandate, which was coming up at that time, and lack of ridership. This is something that a lot of people don't realize, but in the early 2000s, the ridership for the 1522's in public excursions was dropping drastically. That's why you started to see more and more excursions with her doing employee specials for the BNSF rather than actual public excursions. By the later half of the 2000s, the crew was really well acquainted with the BNSF Railway, which, if you don't know, was the railroad that actually bought the Frisco Railroad in May of 1980. It seems that May seems to be a big month for the 1522 in general. But the Burlington Northern bought the Frisco in May of 1980, and just 5 years later, the SLSTA was formed to restore one of their locomotives. Now, a lot of locomotives were considered from the museum, but because the Frisco shops had done work on the 1522 in particular, and restored her back to a pretty much like new condition when she was donated, she was in the best shape by the museum. And they decided, well, let's restore this particular steam locomotive, as stated by the 1522 documentary by Greg Scholl Video Productions. She was heavy enough to pull modern excursion trains, but light enough to run on trackage that larger locomotives might be prohibited to running on. I don't know the exact quote. I might put the clip in somewhere, but or not, because I got copyright struck from him a while back. But anyway, but yeah, the St. Louis Steam Train Association would quickly discover there were a lot of problems with the locomotive in terms of just operating her as an excursion locomotive. Oh. Well, crap. Oh. I missed my chance to see her, but you'll probably see a clip of her running by. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, the St. Louis Steam Train Association, first of all, one of the big problems was that they had to lease the locomotive from the Museum of Transportation in St. Louis. At the time of between 1977 and 2017, the museum was under the ownership of the St. Louis County government. So essentially, this locomotive and most of the cars, most of the equipment, were owned by the government, or the Missouri government, essentially, making it difficult for the locomotive to be operated for a profit, because this is actually going to lead into her retirement as well. The locomotive also, because she was a 1926 Baldwin and was probably the oldest mainline excursion locomotive operating at the time, keep in mind that there's only one or two 1920s locomotives that operate on the main line to this day, and one of them just so happened to be just recently restored back to operation, Santa Fe 3751. In fact, Santa Fe 3751 and the 1522 were built roughly right next to each other in terms of the years. I want to say 3751 was 19. She's also a 1920s Baldwin, same as 1522. The difference, though, was 1522 was a beast of a locomotive compared to 3751. A 482, which, for all intents and purposes, was also there was not as much support for the St. Louis Steam Trade Association as there was for Santa Fe 3751. One example of those many problems that the crew faced was in October of 1990. Keep in mind that in just a few months prior, in June of 1990, they actually made a huge debut at the National Railway Historical Society's convention in St. Louis, traveling over the former Frisco Main between St. Louis and Newburgh. This would be her home territory for the next decade, or essentially in terms of excursions. Well, on a trip up north to the Twin Cities, Minneapolis in particular, they were going to pull some excursions up there in that area. Well, halfway to the Twin Cities, the crew was having issues with the front bogie, the pilot truck here. It turned out that the lubrication system and the axle were all messed up. And this, oh Jesus Christ. Geez, stop that! Get out of the way. And that had to do with the fact of that bush. That was kind of due in part to the locomotive's restoration in a way. I'm not faulting them for the restoration, but it's actually one of the problems that they were dealing with the lubrication system and the roller bearings and everything. I didn't even notice that. He actually modeled that stuff. Cool. Anyway, but basically what was going on was the lubricator had failed, and in turn caused the bearing to run hot and eventually destroy itself. They actually had several cases where this had occurred on other runs later on, where axles or the lubrication system had issues. This in turn, personally, this is my personal opinion. I don't know much about how this occurred, but from what I've understood about her restoration, when they were restoring the locomotive in 1985 and 1988, the Museum of Transportation, keep in mind this was under the ownership of the St. Louis County government, rather than building a drop pit for the locomotive to actually get under the locomotive, they took a backhoe and dug a trench big enough where you could just crawl under there and get to the equipment. That's all they did. So from my point of view, that's most likely what caused the lubrication system to fail in 1990, because it was never properly installed in the first place. But there were quite a few times where this locomotive had quite a few problems over the years. And it started to build up until, again, 2002, when a lack of ridership and the Missouri State and the St. Louis County government wanting more money, railroads opting not to have steam excursions off the railroads, like a whole bunch of factors came into play to cause the 1522 to be retired from excursion service on September 29th, 2002. Now that bit of history out of the way, we're going to look at the various rolling stock and equipment you're going to get, and I'm going to start with the actual like dirty variants first, because these are the ones that were built. These are kind of modeled after the steam era equipment. I have one with a consist right over here. Some of the cars are from the Illinois Central 1500 pack, while some of the cars are from the Frisco 1500 pack. But I do have one that's just sitting out right here. So, first off, I really got to hand it to the guys over at Machine Rails. The texturing and the weathering on this locomotive looks absolutely perfect. I do love that aspect of his work, is the texturing and the look of these locomotives. A lot of the detail work is really well done. Now, the builder's plate here, I will point out, this is actually 1522's builder's plate. However, the date, I believe, is incorrectly marked, 1925. May is correct, but I believe the actual builder's plate, and I'll show a photo of it here on the screen, says 1926. If not, I apologize. But yeah, that's one of those things where it's like, it was kind of a small detail that I noticed. Also, this right here, I never noticed this before. I always wondered what this little thing was. Turns out it's a light, and I assume it was to monitor sparks coming out from the stack. Because another thing I forgot to mention with the detailed history of these locomotives, they were built as coal burners. They were not built as oil burners. They were later converted to burn oil by the Frisco Railroad shortly after they were received to cut servicing times on passengers' runs. And it actually proved very helpful in the long run for the 1522 and her sisters, actually long term. So the wheels here look great. I really do love the detailing he's done. All the steam and everything kind of leaking out of the stack here. I kind of figured that wasn't animated. Little driver here. Probably one of the more iconic pieces of the 1522 was the skull and disc driver, or whatever kind of driver it's called. I don't really know the technical terms for those names. Safety valves. That's actually how they look, but I don't know. Dynamo just powering up there. Turrets, everything's good here. Looks very impressive. Piping, kind of interesting here. Oh, that's coming from the, okay. Wasn't there. Okay. Interesting. Got the air tanks up here. I believe this is the tanks that hold the air for the air compressor, actually. So that's the brakes right there, and then it goes way down here, because I don't see any pipes down here that denote the air brakes. I think that's what that is. I've always wondered what this little tank up here was, but that's actually, I think that's the actual air brake system that they put on the top of the locomotive rather than on the bottom like some other, oh, well, maybe not. There's actual cylinders down here too. I don't know what that is. Weird. Well, maybe somebody in the comments will know what that is, honestly. The snifters there. I really do love the front weathering on the smoke box. It just looks filthy, like you probably been seeing, like it's been beat to hell and everything. So go back to the tender here. Some little things that I did notice was a bit odd was the little hole there in the tender. Most likely because he was using the. Now, keep in mind, I myself commissioned these locomotives 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago now. And I was not what I commissioned was that over there. It was the 1522 and her excursion set. I did not commission these things, the weathered locomotives, and of course 3 freight cars that he decided to add to the pack. I was quite surprised when he did that. But yeah, okay. There's a bit of a shine to this car here when it's in the sunlight, but not very bad. Marker lamps, which I don't believe work. I don't believe these work, but I've never really bothered with them here. Tender. It's kind of nice. Couplers and everything. That's good. Pretty nice. Oh. an oil hatch there. Okay. A couple hatches there. Cool. Just love the detail, the details and everything. So let's go ahead and take a look at the freight cars over here. Yep, here we go. Frisco. So this is what I was talking about with the St. Louis dash San Francisco Railroad. The dash there was always added, like this was a post 1900s addition to the Frisco Railroad. So there was some equipment by the end of the Frisco era that was still just saying SLSF, just plain out without the dash in between. Those were probably pre 1900s. I don't know what. What does that even mean? A lot of the markings down here are pretty good. Down here, pretty nice. Got the air hat, the hatches up there. Nice looking load of coal. They actually made these where you could load them up with kind of coal and stuff. All right. Here's one of the box cars. Like I said, like this is a recreate, like this is just reskins of the existing Illinois Central cars, which some of them are located right there. The flat cars and gondolas there, but we'll find some later. Anyway, same logo. Numbering is a bit strange over there, but I guess that's par for the course for these cars. Textures there. Not too bad, not too bad. And then the tank cars. These are probably one of my favorite little. These, like I think these are a lot of people are very happy, very impressed by these that I've seen talk about them. These cars are. Now the Frisco. Now many railroads don't actually own their own tank cars, except for, as it says here, diesel fuel loading only. These were mainly used to service the diesel locomotives that were eventually to take over for the Frisco Railroad. So these tank cars probably were the very things that were sending fuel to the very things that were going to take down those 1500s up there, which is kind of funny. I do like the logos, look crisp, very well done. Lettering and numbering goes very well done here. Doesn't look like it's actually attached there. What the truck? The placard actually has a flammable liquid on there. That's kind of cool. Hatch, the different color hatch is probably one of my favorite little details there. Yeah. Yep. All right. This consist kind of goes all the way out. So let's see here. Yeah, they're all the same. Okay, got it. So this is all Frisco equipment. Now to put these into kind of comparison, I did have some Illinois Central cars set up a little further down the line, so we'll take a look at those when we get one of these trains moving. So, but next up, we're going to look at the 1522 herself. Now you note that there's some extra details done to this locomotive, such as the flags that are just sitting up here. This is actually something that is only available on this particular version of 1522. You'll get two versions, the weathered variant and the clean variant. And both of which, I didn't even point this out, but both of them have 3D textures on the number plate too. That's kind of cool. This was actually done by DSG DDR. And if you know anything about his work, he's actually the guy that made a lot of the new Pennsylvania Railroad steam locomotives, including the S1 and the New York Central Hudson, the J3A. So he's actually worked on this a little bit alongside him. This is one thing I've noticed with these locomotives is that when they're in AI mode, they just dump sand on the wheels. That just seems to be a weird habit of them. I don't know why that happens. Yeah, this is a lot more cleaner, a lot nicer. And we kind of looked over the same details of the weathered variant, so moving on here. Now this is something that we didn't. This is something that's only been seen on the 1522 herself, leased from the National Museum of Transportation, St. Louis County, Missouri, by the St. Louis Steam Train Association. And it proves there that the and this was added to the locomotive immediately after she was restored. There's actual footage of the 1522 in 1988 on the Wisconsin Central that has this placard on it. You can clearly see it. And she still wears that placard to this day. I actually have a photograph myself of that same placard that I didn't even know existed. So, same with the marker. Okay, so this is something that I don't think was on the original locomotive, on the 1522 when she was in excursion service. I never really bothered to look closely, but he added marker lamps to the rear of the tender here, and I think that was just because he wanted to keep things consistent between the two. Alright. Going over here. Ah, okay. So this is 1522A. This is the auxiliary tender. This one's got an interesting history into itself as well. This was a former Illinois Central water tender, or an auxiliary tender, used on the Illinois Central in the 1930s and 40s to kind of cut servicing times as well. They were actually meant to be used as auxiliary tender. So this was built as an auxiliary tender from the very beginning. When steam ended on the Illinois Central, it was converted to a sand hopper, which is why there's so many hatches on the top here. These are all for sand, not water. When the Museum of Transportation and the St. Louis Steam Train Association got it by 1990, they reconverted it back to an auxiliary tender, but kept the hatches just in case. I guess. I don't know. And a fun fact about this tender nowadays, it is now at the Age of Steam Roundhouse, still wearing the 1522A markings and the old paint scheme that she was painted with for the Frisco 1522. The only thing different was the plastering of the Ohio Central Railroad over the front of it. So she's actually just the way she was when she was operating with the 1522, just with a name on her. And so, as a side note, these auxiliary tenders will spawn in if you go into a scenario and you plop it down. They will actively auto renumber. These are actually classified as locomotives, so these will actively auto renumber. So I actually had to change the number on here because it originally spawned in with 1523, I believe, and I renumbered it to 1522A. So that's kind of a neat little thing he did. So he made it so it can be auto renumbered just because. Now the next cars we're going to look at are the St. Louis Steam Train Association crew cars. These are the equipment that the 1522 operated during her excursion career, and we're going to take a good look at them. Now, I will say these do not have interiors to them. I'll just get that out of the way first. These do not have interiors. There's no passenger views. There's not really much of anything. But yeah. So, the first car we're going to look at is Black Gold. Black Gold is your standard baggage car turned tool car. This is a tool car for the St. Louis Steam Train Association. It was a former, I want to say, Northern Pacific. I would have to look this up. I might be getting this all wrong. I know two of these cars are former Milwaukee Road cars, and I know exactly that blue bonnet at the very end there is a Milwaukee Road car. I don't know which of the. I don't know if Black Gold or Firefly was for another Milwaukee Road car, but I know that the contest consisted of two former Milwaukee Road cars, one former Northern Pacific car, and one former Frisco car that was actually a privately owned car at the time, and still is. Actually, you can still actually rent that car for trips on the on Amtrak, if they so allow it, honestly. But Black Gold here is the tool car for the Frisco 1522. Serves quite a long history, and not much notable to it, really. However, this, along with Firefly and Blue Bonnet, the very car at the end, the tail end car there, all went to the Friends of Milwaukee Road 261 by 2008. The reason I say 2008 is because I actually have a photograph of me standing next to Firefly in 2008. I might as well show it on screen here. It's a very old photograph, but this is, and I know that by 2010 they still had 1522A at the museum as well, because there's a photograph that I have of 1522A in 2010. So much of the equipment hadn't been moved up until around 2012, so shortly after they basically sent the museum off to be privately owned again. By the way, that's another thing I want to point out. I mentioned earlier that the Museum of Transportation was owned by the St. Louis County government between 1977 and 2017. In 2017, the museum went back to private ownership and has since really actually been doing a lot of work to restore a lot of the equipment that have been neglected over the years. So here is Firefly. Firefly is probably one of the more unique cars because the name actually comes from one of the Frisco Railroad's own passenger trains. There was a set of passenger trains pulled by 462 Pacifics called the Firefly, the Frisco Firefly. Now, it's been quoted by Trains magazine, back when these locomotives were around, that these were, quote, the poor man's streamliner, as they looked so weird that I often joke that they are a cross between the A4 Pacifics from the London Northeastern Railway and the J's from the Norfolk and Western Railroad. They look so strange. They were actually, and what's even more interesting is that the paint scheme for the Firefly was kind of similar to this livery here. There's a single colored photograph that I have of one of the Fireflies in service, and it's kind of this bluish, light blue color that we see on these cars that we saw on these cars. The Firefly is also the crew dormitory car for the St. Louis Steam Train Association. So this front half was the crew quarters, and then the baggage compartment, which was back here, I believe was the gift shop. So when the train would stop at various towns, they would actually open up the car here and offer gifts, like to sell gift shops items and everything. Fun fact, and what's interesting, and this is kind of very, very cool, years later, when the Friends of Milwaukee Road 261 actually acquired these cars and started to slowly restore black, gold, and blue bonnet to Milwaukee Road colors, they were going to start working on Firefly shortly after, but of course the pandemic hit and, you know, that stopped all work. I haven't heard much in the way of the updates for that. But as they were tearing out the interior of Firefly, they actually found some of the old merchandise from the Frisco 1522. And they posted about it on their Facebook page, which was rather cool. It was kind of like an old, like, hey, this is kind of a blast from the past. Does anybody remember these? And the very thing they showed was something that my dad had bought at a souvenir shop years later, after the 1522 retired. So a lot of that merchandise is still floating around to this day. But it's a very, like, these cars are very well detailed. Like I said, they don't have interiors, though. Go inside, there's not really an interior to speak of. I do like the fact that to hide that fact, he actually put curtains over the windows. Very nice little touch. It's actually quite nice to look at. So this is the car that is the privately owned car in the contest. This was the privately owned car called the Chateau Club. This car was a lounge car that was basically designed to take care, like, basically for the crew to, you know, relax. This was privately owned the entire time the Frisco 1522 was in operation, and still privately owned to this day, which is several times. The car, I don't know if there's any photographs of her prior to her being painted like this. All the photographs I've seen of her have been of her painted in the Frisco St. Louis Steam Train Association colors like this. Chances are, since then, they have repainted it back to the red and silver livery the Frisco was known for later in their passenger operations. Not much to talk about these cars. They are very well done. I do like the fact that all the trucks, there's some differences here and there, minor differences between the two to kind of show off kind of the details on them, but they're all roughly the same because by this point in their careers, they had to actually change the trucks to be more consistent with each other. Now we get on to the last car, Blue Bonnet. Blue Bonnet is a former Milwaukee Road business car that was acquired by the St. Louis Steam Train Association sometime in the late 1990s. I don't exactly know the date, but the car itself is named I don't know where the name exactly came from, but I do know that the Santa Fe Railroad, which eventually became the BNSF Railroad, which by this point, by the time they got Blue Bonnet, might have been the railroad that they were working with. Blue Bonnet is actually the name of one of the Santa Fe Railroad's freight liveries, and was actually seen sparingly on some old F units as well, just in a different look. This is also one of the few, and I mean few, business cars we have in Railworks. This is something that we do not have, and it's absolutely nice to have a proper, brand new business car for the game, because we don't have any observation cars really in general for this game. We don't have, and the ones we do have are both MSTS conversions. They're both Microsoft Train Simulator conversions, so you got that going for you. But the car is very nicely detailed. I like the fact that if you move the camera ever so slightly, the light will actually change. I do like the fact that the light actually lights up a little bit on this train. It's very nice. The car is very well detailed. I love the little ladders they got here and everything. Very nice, very nice. I do like that. Now it's on to what should be the bread and butter of this pack. The sounds. That's everything. Oh, shit. Go! Oh, this is designs too. Why not? That done. Alright, with the safety valves now off, and trust me, this is just going to get louder and louder as time goes on. This freaking thing has a tendency to blast its safety valves every so often. And there it goes again. I'm going to actually turn down the audio in the editing process here. But yeah, this locomotive, sound-wise, not the greatest, I got to admit. So we're going to take a look at this locomotive kind of in detail here. But essentially, I'm just going to get her started here. The locomotive, let's hear the bell, the whistle first. That's bell. Again, not the greatest sounds, I got to admit. The whistle, in particular, I believe is actually from the Western Maryland H9 pack. I believe it's the exact same whistle. I'll probably put a comparison clip in the video here, but from all indications, that I believe is the exact same whistle. I'll move here. It's not as loud when it comes to this operation, though. It's unfortunate. Chuffing, not the greatest. Go, passing that. Safety valves are still going off, as always. Maybe not a lot. Maybe not any water in there. Passing through here. Now, the one thing that they had is really strange, in my opinion. In the manual, this is labeled as a coal burner, which technically is not technically correct. These were built as coal burners, but they were converted to run oil later in their career. Machine Rails does have another oil burner in their collection, the Sierra Railroad number 3. But much like the Frisco T-54, it is built. It is designed. The code is designed around being a coal burner, and that seems to be an issue with how the 1522 is operated. The reason her safeties are going off repeatedly is because she's building up too much boiler pressure. The fire is too hot. So that's kind of the problem there. I've actually let the fire drop to about 50% and the frickin' thing was still blowing its safeties. There we go. Get her moving. Alright. The sounds, again, not the greatest. I will admit, that was kind of a disappointing thing, but I do plan to fix that. So. And another thing is that she just accelerates way too fast, too. Oh, that's a problem. Now that's... Oh, here we are. So some of these cars are the Illinois Central cars, actually. I'll let the train roll by. So this is the Illinois Central boxcar that I was mentioning before. This is the Frisco variant. Aside from the color change and a few other little details here and there, it's the same car. Same thing goes for the coal hoppers right back here. So, I don't have a tank car here for some reason. That's weird. Oh. Yeah, that's their consist over. That's the consist over. I really should have picked that up, actually. You know what? Fuck it. We're going to go back. Not an emergency. What the fuck is wrong with me? Self-lap. Set the reverser here. I'm actually going to go back and grab those cars. I really do want to run them here. Brakes. Alright, here we go. Backing up. Oh, we have 59 water in the water. That's another thing. Okay, there we go. That was what I've been told happens when you run backwards. So those flags that are flapping, they're flapping in the wrong direction. But that's because I'm going back. That's because I'm moving. These are animated to move when you start moving. So now that I've been going backwards, now that I'm moving, the flags are flapping the other direction. Alright, sit up here. We're going to back up here. We're going to collect those freight cars. Kind of a little sudden change here, but oh well. Make sure we don't go past the switch too far. 70. Here we go. Make sure we get into the switch here. That's the switch we need to focus on there. Alright. By the way, if you haven't guessed right now, we are on the Mississippi Valley, Valley map or route, which I don't know if it's available anymore. Apparently it's not available anymore, and I just so happen to have kept a version of it, which is interesting. Might want to keep a backup of it if that's the case. Alright, we're going to set that past the signal down there. It's a good thing this is a free roam scenario, not an actual scenario. Would have failed horribly. Okay. Enough water in the boiler, we're at 90%. Alright. Does it. Brake. Flat. Reverse or forward. There we go. Apply a bit more brakes there, buddy. I'm going past that signal there. Flat. Alright, we've got that done. Set the locomotive brake. That go, set the locomotive brake. And then what I'm going to do here, I'm going to set the handbrakes on these cars here. If they do have them, I don't know if they do or not. Okay, we do have handbrakes. Good. Alright, set the handbrakes on the rear there. A couple of cars there. And we are going to unhook from this car right here. Release the coupler. Running. Go. Move the train back. And collect these cars. Some of these cars are loaded, some of these are not, so I'm gonna be somewhat interested in what they're gonna do, but okay. I'm gonna collect those cars. I'm gonna take a little trip down the line. Reverse back. Apply the brakes. Left lap. There's the brakes. Running. Good. You have to be lower than 2.5 miles an hour to couple to these cars. $20 miles an hour, eh? Same right. I also didn't bother checking the curve, the radius there. But oh well, it seems fine. It doesn't seem like it derailed, so that's good. Okay. Cars here. Another coast. Oh god. There's more water in the boiler. You can see I'm still blowing the safeties even with my coal, not even my firing, not even done anything. Whoops. Come to a stop. I don't let a brake on or something? Maybe. No, locomotive brake is not on. Oh, come on. Alright, we're hooked. There we go. Alright, let's go. Constant's a lot more heavy now, that's for sure. Give us a little bit more weight here. Well. That's good enough. Alright. Well, so far you can tell that the sounds are not the greatest, so freight car audio is great, but aside from that, like some of the like the chuffs, the stack talk, most of that stuff is not great. So a little disappointing on my thoughts on the sounds. Model-wise, looks amazing. I'm very pleased with how they did that, how they worked all this stuff out. I think there's actual cars over here I can take as well. No, I cannot. Damn it. I'd have to run around it here. But yeah, this pack as a whole, I would highly recommend it just for the model and kind of the history alone. Because the Frisco Railroad, not well represented in Train Simulator Classic. So just for that alone, I was very pleased to see like that all of this stuff came to be and was actually added to the game. I will now, on a personal note, and I'm not trying to advertise here, by the time this video comes out, it probably will be well known. But I will be making an enhancement pack to fix some of the audio and sound issues with the game, or with the locomotive pack. So I will be doing that. I'm actually in the process of making it right now, and I probably should make a clip of the sounds kind of going through soon. So, but yeah, that's my intended plan for this pack, is to actually gonna update the sounds and audio and whatnot. So, oops. Running, there we go. So anyway, like and comment down below, subscribe if you guys want more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.